Picture a 30-year-old man controlling nearly 10,000 acres of Yukon wilderness, pulling $40 million in gold out of the ground every single year, and running an operation so enormous it functions less like a mine and more like an industrial city. That's Parker Schnabel, and he didn't inherit any of it. He built it from scratch, starting at 16, betting his college fund on frozen dirt. So how exactly does something like this happen? Let's unravel the full picture. The empire. Nobody saw coming. Let's start with the scale first because the numbers here are actually difficult to wrap your head around. 10,000 acres of prime Yukon territory, bigger than most towns you've driven through. Sprawling across Dominion Creek with mineral rights, water licenses, and infrastructure that looks less like a mining claim and more like a self-contained industrial nation. One guy owns all of it, and he's still in his early 30s. At the center of this thing sits a $15 million land acquisition, the single largest private placer gold deal in modern Yukon history. 400 mining claims. An estimated 80,000 ounces of recoverable gold still buried in the ground. At today's gold prices pushing north of $2,500 per ounce, that's a gross asset valuation approaching $200 million. And if gold breaks above $5,000, which it's been flirting with, that number doubles to $400 million sitting under Parker's dirt. But the land is almost secondary to the machine he's built on top of it. Little Flake Mining, Parker's primary operating company, runs 4 massive wash plants simultaneously at peak season. 4. No private placer operation in the history of the Klondike has ever attempted that. We're talking Roxanne, Big Red, Slucifer, and Big Bob, industrial monsters processing millions of cubic yards of earth per year, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the brutally short Yukon mining window. The equipment fleet backing these plants is staggering. Cat 700 and 460 excavators ripping through permafrost. Articulated rock trucks hauling overburden across miles of custom haul roads. Custom-built wash plants, each representing multi-million-dollar investments. Miller welding rigs parked on-site for fabrication and emergency repairs. When you factor in diesel, wages, maintenance, and capital costs, this operation burns through $100,000 to $250,000 every single day. The crew? 50 people working 2 12-hour shifts, running the whole machine, from excavation and gold recovery to mechanical repairs, in one of the most geographically isolated regions in North America. Dominion Creek sits 2 hours from Dawson City, 0 cell service, surrounded by wilderness. If it breaks, you fix it. There's no calling a technician, there's no waiting on parts from town. You solve it yourself or you watch millions in production evaporate. During a record week in 2025, the operation pulled 827 ounces of gold, roughly $2.9 million in 7 days. That's what some small mines produce across an entire decade of work. The season target is 10,000 ounces, $40 to $50 million annually, feeding debt obligations, operational costs, and the relentless expansion that's turned Parker Schnabel into the undisputed king of the Klondike. This isn't a lucky family hobby. This is industrial-scale mining controlled by someone who's barely 30, operating at a level that rivals the output of major corporate mining companies. And it all started somewhere far smaller, far simpler, and far more uncertain. Big Nugget and the grandfather who started it all. Parker Schnabel's story doesn't begin in the Yukon. It begins in Haines, Alaska, at a place called Big Nugget Mine, where his grandfather John Schnabel, Big John to everyone who knew him, ran a small but profitable gold mining operation. Most kids grow up playing youth sports or discovering video games. Parker grew up running excavators. By the time he was 5 years old, he was operating heavy machinery under Big John's supervision. While other kids were memorizing multiplication tables, Parker was learning overburden depths, dirt composition, and how to read a mining cut for gold-bearing gravel. Big John wasn't just passing down a trade, he was installing a philosophy. Mining isn't a game of luck. It's a game of discipline, efficiency, and stubborn refusal to quit when everything goes sideways. Those lessons got wired into Parker across years of childhood summers working Big Nugget instead of going to summer camp. But Big Nugget had a ceiling. Small operation, finite reserves, geologically constrained in ways the Yukon wasn't. Big John understood this. He knew the real scale. The deep alluvial deposits, the massive untapped claims, the kind of opportunity that could actually build generational wealth, lived north in the Klondike. So when Parker turned 16, he faced a decision that would define everything that followed. College applications had come in. A trust fund sat ready to pay for tuition. The sensible path was obvious. Get a degree, maybe come back to mining later with credentials and connections and a backup plan. Parker took the college fund and gambled it on Yukon dirt instead. No degree, no safety net, just a teenager betting everything on frozen ground in one of the harshest environments on the planet. And his first move? He didn't start on easy, proven ground. He leased a claim at Scribner Creek from Tony Beets, one of the most dominant and most notoriously difficult landowners in the entire Dawson City district. The lease terms were brutal by design. Tony structured it with an escalating royalty starting at 10%, climbing to 15%, and eventually hitting 25% once production passed certain thresholds. The more gold Parker found, the bigger cut Tony walked away with. While Parker assumed 100% of the extraction risk, equipment, fuel, wages, maintenance, all Parker's problem. Tony just collected his percentage off the top. Most people would have read that contract and walked. Parker read it as tuition, because operating under those terms forced a level of operational efficiency that would eventually become his defining edge. Every gallon of diesel mattered. Every man-hour had to produce. There was no margin for waste when Tony's royalty was eating deep into every cleanup. He made it work using a bare-bones fleet, used equipment including the famously battered Little Blue wash plant, and beat-up D10 dozers he'd bought cheap from the Hoffman crew after their disastrous Klondike season. Nothing fancy, nothing new, everything functional and kept alive through mechanical stubbornness. And every ounce of gold recovered went straight back into the operation. Better equipment, more efficient systems, marginal improvements that compounded season after season. By season 7 of Gold Rush, Parker had saved enough to commission a brand new custom-built industrial wash plant, Slucifer. That was the signal. He wasn't surviving anymore, he was scaling. But working Tony Beets' ground, no matter how well he ran it, came with a fundamental problem. There was a ceiling. Parker was building Tony's empire while operating on borrowed land, paying a royalty that captured a quarter of everything he produced. That realization, that structural limitation, planted the seed for the move that would change everything. Parker didn't want to lease forever, he wanted to own. The formation of Little Flake Mining. By 2014, Parker had outgrown the phase where he was simply proving he could do this. He'd demonstrated he could manage crews, optimize equipment, hit production targets under brutal royalty terms, and turn a profit season after season. But the fundamental problem hadn't changed. He was still working someone else's ground, absorbing all the risk while handing Tony Beets a cut that funded Tony's own ambitions. The next step was formalizing the whole operation. Parker incorporated Little Flake Mining, a dedicated placer gold company built for the Klondike, with an eye toward eventual Alaska expansion. This wasn't paperwork for paperwork's sake. It was a strategic pivot from family-assisted mining venture to a legitimate corporate entity designed to scale. And the philosophy that ran Little Flake Mining set it apart from every other operation in the territory. Data over gut instinct. In the Klondike, most veteran miners operate on decades of experience-based intuition. Guys who've been working this ground for 30 or 40 years trusting their read of the terrain. Parker went in a completely different direction. He hired a dedicated productivity advisor whose entire job was running time and motion studies, tracking truck cycles, measuring fuel consumption per yard of dirt moved, identifying micro-inefficiencies in shift patterns that, when scaled across 24-hour operations, were costing real money. Think about what that actually means. While other operators were winging it on feel, Parker was engineering his mine like a manufacturing floor. Haul roads, optimized for cycle time. Shifts, calibrated for maximum uptime. Equipment monitored to catch problems before failures. The gap between running at 80% efficiency versus 95% across a $250,000 per day burn rate doesn't just matter. It's millions in annual savings. The results compounded. Little Flake grew from a single plant, small crew setup into the largest private placer operation in the entire Yukon territory. Production targets climbed year over year. Equipment graduated from used machinery to custom-built industrial systems. The crew expanded from a handful of people to 45 to 50 employees running dual 12-hour shifts for continuous equipment utilization. But here's the thing that separated Parker's strategy from every miner around him. He wasn't extracting gold to live on it. He was reinvesting it. Every ounce that came out of the ground went back into better equipment, more claims, expanded capacity. While others cashed out and lived off their seasons, Parker was playing a longer, slower, more dangerous game, building infrastructure that could sustain operations for decades. That approach positioned him for the move that would cement his place in Klondike history. The $15 million gamble that changed everything. In 2023, Parker Schnabel closed the biggest placer gold land deal in the modern history of the Yukon. And it wasn't particularly close. He bought the Dominion Creek placer claims for $15 million. 400 individual mining claims covering roughly 10,000 acres of gold-bearing territory. And the geological surveys that came with the deal estimated approximately 80,000 ounces of recoverable gold still sitting under that ground. Do the math. 80,000 ounces at a conservative $2,500 per ounce is $200 million in gross asset value. When gold runs above $5,100, which it has, that number climbs to $400 million. Parker paid $15 million for something potentially worth 20 times that amount. But the real significance of the deal wasn't the math. It was the structural shift. For years, Parker had been profitable on leased claims, but he was always exposed. Landlords could renegotiate. Royalty structures could get worse. Lease agreements could expire at the worst possible moment. Every ounce he pulled out of the ground enriched someone else while he absorbed all the operational risk. The Dominion Creek purchase eliminated that equation entirely. Parker now owned the ground, controlled the water licenses, captured 100% of the value from every ounce recovered. The financial structure of the deal was ambitious to match. $5 million down, with the remaining $10 million structured as seller financing paid across 3 years, meaning roughly $3.3 to $3.5 million in annual debt obligations on top of daily burn rates of $100,000 to $250,000. To service that debt while covering operational costs, Little Flake Mining had to maintain high-volume, high-grade production with no margin for catastrophic bad seasons. That pressure was real. But Parker had spent a decade building an operation designed for exactly this kind of high-stakes throughput. And Dominion Creek wasn't just any ground, it was largely virgin territory. Previous generations of miners had avoided it precisely because the overburden was too deep and too expensive to move with the equipment available to them. 40 feet of frozen muck and worthless gravel sitting on top of the gold-bearing pay layer. With smaller machinery, that depth was a deal-breaker. With CAT 700 excavators and industrial wash plants, it was a competitive moat, because it meant every smaller operator in the territory, everyone without the capital and equipment Parker had assembled, literally couldn't touch it. The deal also included water licenses running through 2030, giving Parker a guaranteed 6-year operational window to work through that 80,000-ounce reserve without regulatory uncertainty. In Yukon placer mining, you can own every claim in the territory, but without water rights, you can't process a single yard of gravel. Owning the ground was the foundation. Now he had to actually build a mining operation on top of it that the Klondike had never seen before. 4 mining plants and a city-sized operation. Most Klondike miners run 1 wash plant. The ambitious ones run 2. Parker Schnabel runs 4 simultaneously during peak season, and the logistics of holding that together are genuinely wild. Walk through the fleet because this is where the scale stops being abstract. Roxanne is the workhorse, the high-volume primary plant that's been the operational core for years. Legendary throughput, proven reliability, the machine you build an empire around. Big Red is the mobile unit, custom-engineered for rapid relocation to new cuts. When Parker's crew identifies a hot pay streak, Big Red gets repositioned fast to capitalize before the short Yukon season slams shut. Slucifer is the heavy-duty virgin ground processor, designed specifically to handle the dense, clay-heavy gravels of untouched claims. Built for Dominion Creek's deep, unworked deposits. It's not subtle. And then there's Big Bob, the ultra-scale Dominion Creek plant, representing roughly $84 million in cumulative production since it came online. The volume this machine processes in a single season would take most operations years to match. Running 4 plants simultaneously means managing 4 separate processing streams, 4 maintenance schedules, and 4 potential failure points, each capable of halting millions in weekly production. And these plants aren't clustered together. They're spread across miles of active mining cuts, each requiring dedicated crews, haul roads, settling ponds, and independent support infrastructure. Behind these plants, the excavation and haulage fleet moves an almost incomprehensible amount of earth. Cat 700 and 460 excavators strip frozen overburden and load gold-bearing gravel into articulated rock trucks built for terrain that would destroy civilian construction equipment in days. The ground at Dominion Creek is soft, muddy, and constantly shifting. The machines are built for exactly that. And the thing that separates Parker's operation from almost everyone else in the territory: 24-hour shifts. Most Klondike miners shut down overnight. Parker runs 2 12-hour crews to keep equipment moving around the clock through the entire Yukon summer. That doubles production capacity, but it also doubles the maintenance burden and demands a level of mechanical self-sufficiency that most operations simply can't sustain. Because Dominion Creek is 2 hours from Dawson City. No cell service, no nearby repair facilities. When something fails, and in this environment, things fail constantly, the clock starts immediately. Guys like Mitch Blaschke and Chris Dumit run Miller Big Blue 800 welding units and Trailblazer 325 diesel rigs, fabricating parts and rebuilding cracked components directly in the field. When a wash plant feed chute collapsed mid-season in a failure that could have meant weeks of downtime, Parker's crew had it rebuilt and running within 48 hours. That response time isn't impressive for mining. That response time is what keeps a debt-financed $15 million acquisition from becoming a disaster. A single day of lost production costs $250,000. A week costs over $1.8 million. The machines are only half the operation. The other half is 50 people working in the wilderness, and managing that is a different kind of challenge entirely. How he manages 50 people in the middle of nowhere. Little Flake Mining employs roughly 50 people at peak season, all of them working in one of the most isolated environments in North America. And keeping that workforce functional is its own full-time operation. The camp runs like a small town. Portable modular housing. Industrial kitchens serving 3 meals daily. Pre-made lunches delivered directly to equipment operators so they don't have to stop working to eat. Shift coordination meetings every 12 hours to keep both crews aligned and informed. No cell service means everything runs on radio. No internet means no streaming between shifts. The rotation is work, eat, sleep, repeat, for months, deep in the Yukon wilderness. The labor bill alone is staggering. 45 employees averaging $100,000 to $150,000 annually when salaries, bonuses, housing, and benefits are factored in. That's roughly $6.75 million per year in labor costs before a drop of diesel gets burned or a single bolt gets tightened. But here's the interesting part. Parker's crew retention is dramatically better than most Klondike operations. In 2025, 7 members of Tony Beats's crew left mid-season to join Parker's team. The Klondike has a long memory, and people immediately started calling it the Beats defection. What's telling is that it wasn't about money. It was about how the operation runs. Tony Beats operates old school. Brute force, push equipment until it breaks, fix what's broken, push again. Parker's operation is organized. Maintenance first. Data-driven. Equipment gets serviced on schedule before failures happen. Crews know their schedules weeks out. The whole machine runs smoother, and experienced miners who've worked chaotic operations notice the difference immediately. That reputation, for competence, for organization, for running a professional operation, attracts the best people available. And when you're running 4 wash plants through 24-hour shifts in Yukon wilderness, The difference between the best available people and whoever you could get is measured in millions. The environmental edge. Nobody talks about. Here's something that doesn't fit the popular image of a guy ripping 10,000 acres of Yukon wilderness apart for gold. In 2022, Parker Schnabel received the Robert E. Leckie Award for Excellence in Environmental Stewardship from the Yukon government. The guy processing millions of cubic yards of earth annually won an award for environmental responsibility. And it wasn't marketing, it was strategy. Parker's operation runs advanced dust and water control systems, habitat restoration programs, and hydro-engineered tailing storage that exceeds regulatory minimums rather than just meeting them. The 2026 plan includes something called integrated land use recovery, topsoil restoration, and native species seeding running concurrently with active mining operations, preserving land for future forestry or natural regeneration while the extraction is still happening. Why go this far when most miners do the bare minimum required to keep their licenses? Because environmental compliance isn't just a regulatory box to check, it's a competitive advantage. Exceed the standards, and your water licenses stay secure. Face less friction from local communities and regulators. Maintain operational flexibility that operators with questionable environmental records gradually lose. There's also a profitable angle hiding in the environmental work. Historically, placer mining was inefficient by today's standards, often leaving 10% to 20% of the gold sitting in waste piles. Parker's operation has implemented modular ore sorting and tailings recovery systems that reclaim over 85% of residual minerals from historic dumps. That's not just responsible, that's revenue, generated by cleaning up messes left by previous generations. The environmental focus is part of what separates Parker's approach from the old guard in the Klondike. Operators like Tony Beats built empires through volume and persistence. Parker is building his through efficiency, innovation, and playing a longer game where the regulatory and community environment you operate in actually has consequences for what you can do and for how long. The future. Australia. Creek and beyond. Dominion Creek gave Parker ground security and 80,000 ounces in the bank. That would be enough for most people. Parker isn't most people. In January 2023, Little Flake Mining signed a production royalty agreement covering 5.5 miles of alluvial gold claims at Australia Creek with Metallic Minerals Corporation. This deal is structured differently from Dominion. Instead of outright purchase, Parker operates as the exclusive extraction partner, taking the majority of gold produced while paying Metallic Minerals a variable royalty. Full access to high-potential virgin ground without dropping another $15 million upfront. The geological backstory on Australia Creek is genuinely interesting. From the 1920s through the 1960s, the valley served as a utility corridor, providing water and hydroelectric power to the massive floating dredges operated by Yukon Consolidated Gold Corporation. Because it was infrastructure, nobody ever mined it. Modern drilling has since revealed gold and gravel values that rival the best-producing areas of the historic Klondike, making it arguably one of the most significant untouched discoveries in the region in decades. Parker's commitment includes a $1 million minimum annual work requirement and a winter drilling program of 400 to 600 holes to fully map the pay streaks before mining begins. Aggressive, expensive, and entirely consistent with how he approaches every expansion. Understand what you're dealing with before committing the full weight of your operation. The longer horizon also involves technology. Moving through 2026 and beyond, the focus shifts from expanding land holdings to intensifying extraction efficiency through AI and automation. Parker is leading the Yukon in adopting autonomous excavation machinery, satellite-based mineral detection, and IoT monitoring systems that track operational efficiency in real time across a spread-out, multi-plant operation. The projection for 2026 includes deploying a new mining machine designed to boost gold extraction efficiency by 30%. Part of a broader industry shift toward automation expected to reach 78% adoption among top-tier operators within a few years. By 2026, Little Flake Mining is estimated to be 30% more energy efficient than it was in 2022, driven by precision extraction techniques, remote sensing, and AI-guided geological mapping that identifies pay streaks more accurately while reducing the volume of waste material processed. There's also a legacy dimension now that Parker is 30 and has built something genuinely large. The Dominion Creek acquisition converted years of profitable leasing into permanent ownership, a foundation that doesn't expire. The technology investments keep the operation competitive through the next decade. The environmental stewardship locks in regulatory security for the long run. At 30 years old, Parker Schnabel controls an empire generating $40 to $50 million annually, sitting on reserves potentially valued at $400 million, employing 50 people, and operating at a scale that rivals corporate mining companies. He walked away from college at 16, bet his trust fund on frozen Yukon dirt, and built the most productive private gold operation the modern Klondike has ever seen. And with that, we wrap up our look inside Parker Schnabel's massive gold empire. What part of his story hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into how people like this actually build what they build, Global Status has you covered.